Hey everybody, Philosophy Society, Achilles Justice here. It's August 16th, 2023, a Wednesday. This video is being done by my phone instead of the laptop, so maybe it's more clear, but it's not live because I forgot my charger. So we'll upload this to YouTube later. Yeah, so today, okay. Yeah. So what I was thinking about earlier is the notion of like philosophy and then being philosophical. So the difference between these ideas. Philosophy as like an area of study or a subject. And then being philosophical is like a verb or an action. And this goes into the context of like something that you do. So philosophy as an area of study generally has to do with like, they just call it the history of philosophy, which is a story, generally speaking. So you have Eastern and Western. Western is generally like analytic versus continental. And then Eastern philosophy is like Asian philosophy or Confucianism, Taoism. Western philosophy, there's the pre-Socratics and Plato, so we usually just talk about Plato and onward until present day. So that's generally what we say the history of philosophy. The other thing we could talk about is that in every discipline, like chemistry, physics, when you get your PhD, you're a doctor of philosophy within that subject, right? So it's like if you have chemistry, and like this is chemistry, to be the philosopher of chemistry is to have this like overarching understanding of all the properties within chemistry, and then you get like an abstract meta view of whatever that subject might be, right? And your peers have to like upgrade you to that level of doctorate. But that's not really what we mean when we say being philosophical, because being philosophical is different than just some subject or what somebody else said about anything, whether it's a specific subject like chemistry, or if it's the nature of being, or epistemology, or art, right? What Immanuel Kant talked about when he discussed the categorical imperative, what Kant did was, Kant observed his experience. So if this is Kant's bubble of experience, and drew some universal principles out of his experience as a human being, and used language, this was his idea bubble again, to make sense of that in some structured way, right? And so that process of using symbols to make sense of our experience is being philosophical. And there's a whole list of philosophers, right, who went through this process of conceptual analysis. Conceptual analysis plus linguistic application. So they observed their experience, then they found out how to use words to represent what they experienced, and then they made, we could judge. So students of philosophy will judge the merit of whatever these people said. They'll evaluate it, right, by using logic. So then we these guys, they apply logic to it. They might feel things or identify with a specific philosophy. They try to make sense of it. right? That is still not really being philosophical. It's it's kind of part of the puzzle, but it's not, I would not say that's necessarily the essence of it. When we have a person doing some action, right, what would that be? And the reason that I would say it's not necessarily the case that students of philosophy are being philosophical is because all students do that, of all subjects. The student of chemistry is using logic. They may have some feeling towards a specific subject area. They may identify with some ideas more than others. They all try to make sense of it. That's what learning is in general, right? Students are just learning or understanding. But those are different verbs than being philosophical. Those are different actions that one would take. So in university, in school, you don't really learn what it means to be philosophical. You learn how to be reasonable, maybe not. You learn how to communicate, maybe not. Right? So where do we find, and this is, again, a lot of the times it always comes back to, the answer. What is the answer to the problem Achilles is identifying? It's the organization I'm trying to advocate, the Philosophy Society. Philosophy Society, that's why I don't really go into the history of philosophy that much. The university will do that for you. They've already taken care of that. And a lot of people are much better at it than me, maybe, because they've just spent more time doing that. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it means to be philosophical, and then teach people how to do that, so that we can have more philosophers. That is the meta approach of what I believe the answer to all these problems is. It's a method so we can generate answers, right? And so this is the domain of the Philosophy Society, or really just a group of people doing this activity, right? Which is different than an academic university context, right? This is about, a peer review process, graduate school, reading, writing, etc. All that stuff is important. It's not that it's not important, but in some ways, this is way more important. Why do I say that? Because when we look at the origins of philosophy, they didn't have this. They maybe had writing and reading, sure, but the majority of what is in the university and in the academy just didn't exist back then, right? The academy was Plato's school. That's like the first, we could say like in some ways one of the first real schools. We don't really know that much about it because a lot of stuff is destroyed from back then. In comparison to what we know about this university and other universities, you can just go online, you can read a bunch, all the policies are there. Where are the policies for Plato's Academy? Like, where's that book? We don't have that, even if it existed. And so it's important to learn the history of philosophy, but that is in some ways a different thing than what I am going towards. I'm doing something else. And I'm trying to figure out what it means to be philosophical. And some philosophers do talk about this, like Plato, right? And so let's go into it a bit more. We have a person, right? There's their environment, and then there's their mind. And within their mind, there's going to be language, okay? And what we want to see here is how this person perceives their environment, okay, and how they perceive their own mind. Those are two things. So there's the self to the environment, and then the self to the mind. Yeah, and these are like functions of perception. Or you can like say like reflection and introspection. And early psychologists went into that and didn't find any fruitful, reliable, results from that. But this is what we have to work with as an individual, right? We can be aware of what's going on out there. I can be aware of myself. So with these two functions, right, we can utilize, so one of our tools is language. And so we have the individual again, there's the environment, and so there's something going on in the environment, some phenomena. Call this phenomena A. Right? And the person becomes aware of it. Boom. They see something. So it's like the first time a kid sees like waves, like a huge wave. And the kid's like, whoa, it made noise. I got wet from it. Like it went in my face. Ugh. It's like I was babysitting with my friend and she's a little kid and there's waves and stuff, right? So, and it's exciting. Like kids when they're like between 2 and 3, they're in discovery mode. They're just doing stuff. I'm like, whoa, I've never seen, I didn't know that was gonna happen. I've never seen it before. It was a discovery from their perspective, right? But as you get older, you've seen so much stuff. You're like, I can predict what will happen. You know what I mean? Like, I know that's going to happen. When I hit the switch, the lights turn on. Whatever, I don't care. Right? When I close the door, it makes a noise. I get it. Sometimes, like science, part of it is to discover phenomena, and that discovery, and so this is the perception, but then there is the mind utilizing language to represent this phenomenon. There are two different things. And there can be problems in the perception. So one is the perception. For example, if I look to the sky and see a rainbow, and I'm like, let us travel to that space and collect all of the color and use it for our garments. Whoever tried that was very unsuccessful, right? At whatever point in history. The second area of problem is within the mind, and specifically language. So how I use my language, and this is where reasoning comes in, going back to the student of philosophy, or student in general, how symbols connect together, logic, is super important in my representation that uses symbols in general, right? If I'm just going to perceive things and not attach words to it, then it doesn't really matter so much, because I don't have to follow the rules of reason per se, right? If I want to make sense or take that mode of representation and then give it to other people in some ways. Say, if you use this language, then you will be able to have the same results as me. So it's like a map. If you go, so you go thing, you start here, and then you go to this spot. That's kind of what language is. It's a map. It's that, well, there's one function of language. There could be other functions like poetry. But the end result may be, I want you to have some kind of a feeling, right? It's not about the way that the words are put together is to have some kind of effect, right? And that may be variable between the person creating the art and the person perceiving the art. It can change over time as well. In this context, though, using language for a specific representative result of the environment, it's important to understand the use of language in this context. It's not poetry. When we're looking at being philosophical, the point is how we perceive our environment, how is our mind functioning, And then what do we do with language in the relationship between our mind and the environment for which we're in? And all disciplines, for example, like for COVID, scientists want to observe COVID and understand the nature of the virus such that they can, destroy it completely or save lives or whatever. And if there's confusion about what they perceive, and there can be instruments to increase our perception, right? Tools and stuff. If there's mistakes in that, and it's not really a corona, it's more of like a different shape, then when they're doing some kind of a vaccine or some other intervention to prevent people from getting sick, it may not be as effective, right? So it's important for us to understand how the mind works and the environment that we're in, and also how we map language on. Language is kind of like a filter that we put on top of things. And if the map, our language, is incorrect, it doesn't actually map onto reality. That's like looking at it and then you go off the cliff. Right? You're like, oh, it was 3 feet off. Maybe there was erosion, but then we need to be updating the map. Right? So it may not be consistent. Like the James Webb Telescope, for example, is trying to understand when the origin of the universe occurred. And there's ideas now that maybe it was 26 billion years ago, for example, not 14 billion. And so we're updating the map. And so this updating process is part of the scientific method or the scientific institution. And so being philosophical, everybody can do that. Well, everyone that there's the degrees of effectiveness. How philosophical are you really, right? If you don't have language, if you can't perceive things, you're in a vegetative state, you're not going to be that philosophical, right? So this is important because when we talk about language, the story of philosophy, all of these philosophers that we study, that is enriching our language. It is giving us conceptual tools to understand our mind, understand how language itself interacts with itself and with our mind and the environment, and to understand our environment, amongst other things. Yeah?
So, my understanding is that you're presenting as being philosophical as something core, like building your core, something like that. And those examples on the left are about things that are sort of, they are not core, they are sort of like, you made an example that, well, all these sort of sciences, they didn't exist at the time of the big philosophers. At the same time, it didn't stop them from being those kind of characters. So my understanding is that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, being philosophical is sort of some sort of a core, and these things are sort of like something that gets built, like you have a foundation and these get built on a foundation. And if something gets built on a foundation that's shaky, there could be some sort of problems with it.
Yeah. Yes.
In that sense, so when you talk about being philosophical and in terms of branding of what you do, it's like sort of, it could be talked about also as building your core versus building your foundation, versus building a house of cards, because house of cards are not built on a strong foundation. It's like sort of a branding thing of like being philosophical, building your core, building your essence.
This is knowledge. Generally, right? You can know about Confucianism. The application of Confucius wisdom to your life would be being philosophical, utilizing Confucianism. Right? Now, some philosophical insights may not have direct application to this process, but it may increase the quality of your understanding of certain elements of this mechanism, right? Like when Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," or "I think I am," it's a notion of like existence, and he is bringing out this element of skepticism in general, right? And so we can take that understanding of skepticism and we can apply it going forward to whatever we're dealing with. How do I know if this is real or if this is true, right? So before, like for Plato to determine like what came first, the Republic, like what was the thing that created the Republic? How did Plato do that? Right? If Plato is like one of the greatest philosophers ever, if not the greatest philosopher ever, in the sense that almost all philosophical problems were identified by Plato and have not really been resolved up until today, like a great majority of things. What is it that Plato did to get to that point? And why is it that we don't really have a concise, no individual really put everything together in such a way like Plato did, or Aristotle, So there's something, that person did something. There is some action that person took so that their brain was able to formulate all of those ideas in a coherent way.
Are you suggesting that in some aspect they might have some sort of fundamental understanding of some core aspects, something like that? Are you suggesting something like that, like someone like Plato, which enabled them to, from this core understanding, come up with these ideas, the different manifestations of these core understandings? Are you suggesting something like that, or am I getting it?
Yeah, for sure. So what that would be is just the being philosophical element, that there's a certain way of being, way of living your life that will increase the probability that you can have fruitful philosophical insight. And there's also technical training that you can learn in university that will increase your ability to write things down and make sense of things, right? But being philosophical as a practice, as a way of life, is in some ways how I perceive myself in the world and how I utilize language to make sense of that. Not necessarily what everybody else said. You are a new person, right? And you can say something. And you may say something that is more profound than all of these people, because these people were limited by the time that they were born in. And, in 2023, we have a lot on our side, especially in this country. There's a lot that we take for granted, a crazy amount. It's insane how much we have to our advantage. Like just air conditioning right now. Not having to be irritated by the heat, for example, is something that you'd be laughed at back then, There's a place where you're consistently cooled and it's not dug deep in the ground. What are you talking about? You're standing like 40 feet in the air or like 60 feet in the air and it's super cold. You're not in a tree. What are you talking about? Buildings can't go that high. You're crazy, So what can we do as people so that every person can generate the highest quality of idea from the experience that they have? And being philosophical is that thing. And to increase the probability, to help each other out, we just do it as a group. You just have a bunch of people doing it together. That's the best. Not just one person against everybody. We do it as a collective. And the benefit of that is we can regulate each other in these mechanisms. That's kind of what the peer review process is in an academic context. Is I read your paper, I criticize it, I say this is wrong, this is right. But this is more about criticizing and evaluating how we live our lives. And then we turn, so you say, okay, sure. Well, but is criticism always good? Are you qualified to give criticism? Sometimes criticism can be bad, right? And so we just turn to the science of psychology, which can help us understand the best way to communicate to people about certain kinds of information. And then we can normatively structure a social group with the principle of being philosophical in ways that are pro-social, supportive, you know, like a loving family kind of, right? And not a crazy cult, you know? And so that is the best way to resolve all the problems. Doesn't matter what the problem is. If we can have people that live their lives in such a way that they can make sense of what's going on and communicate to others so that those other people can use that information, then no matter what comes our way, we can solve it. Instead of relying on a very select few people that almost go against the grains of society. And it's very challenging and difficult for them. You know what I mean? If we can take the benefits of what we've learned from psychology, like clinical psychology, positive psychology, and we can implement that, then we can increase our chances of success. And so that's why the Philosophy Society and being philosophical is, you know, incorporating these principles and properties that we've learned in psychology, because it just increases our success. It just makes more sense, right? It increases our understanding of this whole process. So, yeah, so today was just the difference between philosophy as a subject and being philosophical as a verb, and the difference between the two. What do you guys think about that?
So I got a chance to express my views, James.
So, marinating it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's all I really had to say for that. That's basically it. And then, like, you know, it's really the next step is just, you would just start creating groups and you would look at what it means. Like you'd start to go to a more empirical approach, right? And map out the category of, like what I started doing here, of what it means to be philosophical as an individual. Like, what does it really mean to do that? And like, the process of observing a phenomena and then utilizing words to make sense of that phenomena, and then having some testing process involved in that, that's for the individual, and then communicating that to others, and then there's the feedback process, right? So there's self-observation. That's the first thing. And then some form of testing, and then social feedback, which would be observation of other, right? And then there'd be some integration of feedback. At least those four things, you know? There's what I see, and is what I see real? Because there can be optical illusions, right? So how do I make sure that it's not my perceptual apparatus that is detecting this information? Like one of the criticisms for the UFO information is that it's the instrument itself. It's the lens that's making this dot move all over the place, right? So we want to make sure it's not our human condition that we're just observing. Like when you see floaters on your eye, it's not there's actually some invisible orb out there. It's that there's like a microorganism, like a cell on your eye, like a white blood cell or something like that, and you're actually seeing that.
Well, when they talk about like those sorts of things, right? It's maybe like, I don't know. I feel like there's a need to talk about this. It's like, okay, if we assume some sort of civilization has that sort of ability, that sort of power to create this sort of technology, they have the power to do anything they want to, and we wouldn't have power over them. So it's like, you know, the Stoic philosophy that if you can do something about something, then let go. It's like, you know, it's like, to me, when they talk about those sort of things, it's like, I think, like maybe it's not relevant to me, because if it exists, like, well, they have the power, so it's like, am I going to worry about something that I don't have power over? And it's like, okay, if it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter either way. And I don't think much about these things, but it's like, for some people, they want to know, and it's like, I understand, there is a curiosity, right? There is like that aspect of curiosity. So I personally deal with this sort of stuff like that, but it may not be the best way to deal with sort of that sort of stuff.
So I'm still trying to understand what you mean. So when you're communicating, you're saying, like, if someone thinks that the eye floater is an orb out there? Is that what you're referring to?
So what I'm saying is that, okay, like, yeah, some people claim that they have seen UFOs, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I say, okay, there are two possibilities. Either they exist or they don't exist, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have any evidence that they exist, but for the sake of, like, sort of the more abstract view of the thing, right? So I don't need to start disagreeing with them and then wasting energy, right? So if they exist, the technology is just so much more advanced that if they want to do something, like, I have no power over
Okay,
it. So
the
it's
aliens,
like,
yeah, like, yeah.
So it's like, okay, like, the Stoic philosophy that
Mhm.
if you don't have power over something, then just let go.
Yeah, I understand that completely, for sure. If we have no control, then there's no need to be upset about it.
So it's like it becomes irrelevant to me, like those sort of topics. It's like, but yeah, I understand some people may want to understand these things and they have an inclination for it, and no, that's fine with me.
A similar argument to resolve the problem of whether we're in a simulation or not, that we wouldn't know the difference, so it doesn't matter anyways, if we are or not, right? How would we know the difference? Like, it doesn't affect me actually. Like, how does it affect me?
It's like, in a more core way, it's like, it's like let's say I'm in grade 12 and I'm trying to understand like PhD and stuff, right? I'll just drive myself crazy. Like, let's do grade 12, let's finish grade 12.
Sure, yeah. I guess, so what I'm communicating is like, let's say that we're in a democratic society, and there's COVID, which we can see, it's like right there. And what do we do about it? And then there's like, maybe there's UFOs, and then we have like $1 billion, and we can either spend that $1 billion on dealing with the COVID problem, or we can spend the $1 billion on creating technology to protect us from the aliens just in case they attack.
Yeah, I understand.
Right?
At that level, it becomes an issue, right?
So then, or 400 years ago, when or 300 years ago-ish, when the Great Witch Hunt, when we were burning people alive because we thought that they were witches or whatever. That's are they really a witch, or are they just suffering from schizophrenia, right? And if they're suffering from schizophrenia, or if they're like a psychopath or someone who has brain damage and they're hurting people and whatever, that's a problem that they're hurting people. Or if they're a cannibal, something crazy, we obviously need to deal with that. But just having the unanimous decision to crucify people and burn them at the stake, I don't know. Maybe that's not. I don't want to live in that society. Me being a philosopher, if I'm going to be labeled as that, and a very outspoken person, I would have had to run from the mob many times. And there are many philosophers that have almost been killed or killed by the Catholic Church, So, and scientists. So it's, like this whole approach is, even if I quickly just used an example for the Kremlin's special operation, I could be thrown in jail for 15 years or something crazy like that. Just to talk about it. And that's just like one property of this. It's like there are certain places in the world, or like Islamic states, where you can't even approach this. Like this is not the map of really what's going on. It's that there's God, and then there's like humans, and God has a list of things, and there's a whole bunch of humans that believe that that's what's going on, and if you deviate in any way, they will kill you. You're done. That's their solution. That's the problem. Like in this country, that's not acceptable, right? And I agree that ought not be acceptable, And the reason that we can even criticize this, state of society is because we were philosophical in some way. We observed what was going on, we made sense of it, we used language to apply it, we developed certain principles like ethics, right? We used our reason to say, well, how does this make sense in itself at all? And yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt. That thing that you just drew there with a god, and then there is a list, and then if you deviate from that list, you're eliminated essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Could we draw a parallel from that to cancel culture in society today, where
Yes.
there is an ideology or a narrative that is considered the appropriate or accepted sort of ideal of society or way of thinking, and if you deviate from that way of thinking, you are cancelled.
Yeah,
Is that
for sure.
fair?
So that map would look like there are certain like norms. These are the norms, 1, 2, 3, and all of the people collectively agree. But this is still relative. There is some ambiguity there, and then if one of them deviates out of these norms, then they get excommunicated. You know, they can't get work, and it's like, okay, like, you know, we have a place for like justice in society. It's like if you commit a crime, if you actually did something to harm the humans, we've created a method to distribute, to arbitrate that, and we can, like, just that idea in a very broad sense is good. What it really means, though, you know, like if someone suffers from a serious mental health issue and they just don't have the capacity for self-control, right? Like if someone's addicted to meth and they have brain damage and they just can't control themselves, and there's a potential and a risk that they're going to hurt others, institutionalizing that person may be the safest thing. Not necessarily in a cell, but maybe in an environment where, you know, they would cost money, but it could be a healthy place where they can do art and they can like have fun and do things and have people that are overseeing them, make sure that they're going to be violent, they can intervene before the violence occurs. Instead of them having them on like a university campus, for example, and threatening violence to, you know, students and stuff. I don't think that's necessarily the best solution to that, right? So, yeah, this is the cancel culture example. And this is a big mob mentality kind of issue here. The difference between the cancel culture thing and the God thing is the God thing is a divine entity that has scripture and a prophet. There's a different series of connections that leads to the behavior or the group cohesion. Whereas the cancel culture thing, you know, we have certain things like, there's certain examples, you know, like, you know, if you're a Holocaust denier, for example, you know, or if there's like some kind of sexual abuse, you know what I mean, within the workplace. Like those are two prominent, there's people that had been canceled for both of those. And, you know, if someone was engaged in sexual abuse, there's a way we can deal with that, you know? If maybe being around vulnerable people isn't appropriate. But if they have a mental health condition and they can't understand what's going on, you know what I mean? Like if you just remove them from work and don't allow them to engage with society, they're not, like, are they actually learning from it? Like from a psychological standpoint? You know, like when we look at people that have, like if someone's like a chauvinist or like, you know, very disrespectful to women, like slaps a girl on the ass, for example, in the workplace, just as an example, or whatever, you know? You know, why did that person do that? And what is the best means for them to learn why it was inappropriate and how they can deal with their own self-control and regulate themselves, right, in an appropriate way? Because if this person was like a very, like for example, let's say there's AI, you know, and we have one person that is the best person at containing the security issues of AI and making sure it doesn't get out of control. And then that person develops some kind of an issue and has a problem in some workplace situation. Are you just going to cancel them? You know, probably not, right? Like, you're probably going to say, okay, let's find an intervention thing. Let's just figure out how to help this person so that they don't repeat the behavior, right? And really, you just want them to not repeat the behavior, understand the mistake, you know, just not in the contemporary way of burning them at the stake. That there's a difference here. The cancel culture thing is one thing, and so when we have moral issues or ethical dilemmas, right? These two contexts, and then, you know, religious questions. Being philosophical can help us with this. We can draw from the history of philosophy to input principles, and again, going with Aristotle's virtue ethics, we can learn to develop practical wisdom to in the moment resolve certain problems or avoid certain issues. And having a group that does this will increase the probability that these problems will be solved retroactively or in the moment and be prevented proactively. All right, that was good. Thanks.
Thank you.